Afternoon.
Afternoon.
How are you?
I could be better.
Well,
But
thank
I'm
you very
surviving.
much for coming all the way from Philadelphia on a rainy afternoon.
Pleasure's
I
mine.
really appreciate it. Could you please introduce yourself?
All right. My name is Faith Wambura Ngunjiri. I come from Kenya. I've lived in the U.S. about 10 years now. I'm officially Associate Professor of Leadership Studies at Eastern University as of this fall.
Thank you so much and congratulations.
Thank you.
I'm so happy to hear your good news. And Eastern University, I think, is extremely lucky to have you.
Yeah, someone needs to tell them that.
I shall write them a letter to that effect. So, this afternoon I'd like us to talk about the life and legacy of Wangari Muta Mathai, who, as we know, passed away last year.
Yes.
I want you to talk about her impact on your life, or on your, the way in which you see life, and then we'll talk about her legacy.
All right. Well, as you heard me say before, when I was about 7 or 8 years old, my father used to keep telling me, "You are just like Wangari Maathai." Now, the reality is, at that point, I did not know who she was. I had never heard of her until my dad kept saying that. And it wasn't until much later that I began to understand who this amazing woman was, because she was very involved at that point in a very messy divorce, and then she tried to get into parliament and was denied, through technicalities, could not get in. So her name was everywhere, but for a young child, I just didn't know about her. And so when I was much older, and the more I got to learn about her, the more I began to realize why I was being told, "You are just like Wangari Maathai." And I began to realize something about when you speak out, when you stand up for what you believe is right, including stand up to your dad, which is not always done, especially by young girls, then you're just like this woman who everybody knew about in the whole country. Suddenly, a young woman who knows her rights, or who speaks out for what she believes is right, whether for herself or for others, becomes, "You are just like Wangari Maathai." So I think for me, my view of her life and legacy for me as a person is that if she could achieve everything she did, many times by herself, many times against a lot of odds, then surely I've got a much better chance of doing something purposeful with my life.
Excellent. You know the poem you read when we had the conference
Yes.
on Wangari Maathai at Brooklyn College in March? It was extraordinary. So I wonder if you'd like to share it with us so that we can record it.
Sure. An ode to the first African woman to earn a PhD in East and Central Africa. It's a portrait of Wangari Maathai. Miriam Wangari. Mary Josephine Wangari. Mary Josephine Wangari Muta. Wangari Muta. Wangari Muta Mathai. Wangari Muta Mathai. You have been known by many names. Names imposed on you, names you imposed on yourself, names you earned by marriage. I am not an object, the name of which can be changed with every new owner. I now pronounce myself Wangari Muta Mathai once and for all. Inspiring. A story of courage, conflict, conviction. A story of strength, serendipity, sagacity. A story of adversity, advantages, admonition, courage to pursue your dreams, as serendipity placed you in the right place at the right time. Courage to stick to your convictions, as fate placed you in insurmountable challenges. Divorce, jail, job loss, jail, broke, jail, hunger strike, jail. How many academics have left the ivory tower for the grassroots struggle? How many, after working so hard to earn tenure and promotion to gain equality of the sexes on a university campus, would take that fight to the street just when all seems to have settled? Getting your braids cut off, pulled off, piled with dirt in the search for justice. Persistence, that ought to be your Anglo name. I now baptize you. Persistent, resilient, resourceful, radical. Mother, through struggle, release political prisoners. Hunger strike with the mothers, getting strength from motherhood in the midst of personal, political struggles. Pioneer, first woman to earn a PhD, 1971 was a very good year, yet not celebrated. Not even a small article in the local dailies. Long journey to success, divorced because you were apparently too strong, too educated, too successful, too stubborn, too hard to control. 1979 was a very bad year. My greatest claim to fame was that I was married to a man who was getting rid of me. Publicly, loudly, media circus. Were they making an example of you, lest any woman should decide to be strong, educated, and successful more than her own husband? 1982 was a very tough year. Failed attempt at running for parliament, road blocked by government. On whose wrong side you'd found yourself. You lost your university job too. No home, no job, no money. Professor Resilient, never give up, never give in. Rise from the ashes like a phoenix. Focus on Greenbelt Movement and National Council of Women of Kenya, leading both to success in the midst of financial struggles, and rise up to lead political struggles notwithstanding. 2002 was a very good year. Entry into parliament, but alas, Assistant Minister for Environment? What the? Why on earth? After all the sustainability leadership you'd already demonstrated, Assistant Minister? 2004 was the best year of your life. First African woman Nobel laureate. And then the celebrations reverberated through the city, the university, the country, the continent, and the world. Success, isn't it the sweetest revenge? No need to raise arms. Instead, the sweet smell of success is now your legacy. Success to wipe away the tears, to swipe away the sneers of those who place barriers in your path at university, in the government, in uncivil society. Success, now they call you great, honorable, Nobel laureate, professor, mother, activist, global leader, Africa's hope. Wangari Muta Mathai, gone way too soon. We were not ready for your sudden departure. We were not prepared for you to leave us yet. But you have fought the good fight. You have won the race. Now rest. We will pick up where you left off in our universities and city halls, our colleges and communities, our parliaments and political parties, until justice as you envisioned it becomes reality for all.
Thank you very much.
A pleasure.
So, now that the poem is read, do you want to put a gloss on it?
I don't know. I think I say everything that I feel through the poem. I think part of what surprised me, and probably shouldn't have, was that after all the struggles, the lack of acceptance, not by women, not by men, not by government, not by institutions. When Professor Maathai became the Nobel laureate, she suddenly had acceptance. That, yes, her journey up to that point had changed a lot because she was now in parliament with a 97% vote from her constituency. So you can see that there was a certain change of heart, at least within that particular community. But then she goes into parliament and becomes Assistant Minister for Environment, which just didn't make sense to anybody because she'd already demonstrated leadership in that area. So her winning that Nobel Peace Prize just goes to demonstrate that sometimes, you know, a prophet may not be accepted in their own home, and yet can go out there and be accepted and be, you know, become a big international figure. And I think that was partly the case for Professor Maathai, that her journey in Kenya, even in spite of getting into parliament, where she was still, you know, quite oppositional, even though she was on the side of government, she wasn't afraid to tell them when they were wrong, which is probably why she was not, you know, made a cabinet minister instead of assistant. That her story is one of gaining acceptance from the outside world before she gained acceptance at home, demonstrating that sometimes you've got to work through the struggle, even if you don't see the rewards, because, you know, well, hopefully you see the rewards on this side of heaven, but whatever the case, doing it in spite of, whether you're getting acceptance, whether you're getting rewarded for it or not. Doing it because it's the right thing to do, because it's the best thing to do, because you know that whatever leadership you're doing, whatever activism you're doing, it's the best thing for that community, whether they recognize it when you start or not.
You know, in the poem you also talked about, you finished with the emphasis on us continuing the work of Wangari Maathai.
Yes.
So, since you are a professor and you do teach in the university, one of the places that you mentioned,
yeah.
How do you see yourself and people like you continuing Wangari Maathai's work?
I think part of what she teaches us, part of what her life teaches us, is that we shouldn't only be stuck in the ivory tower, that we should ensure that whatever we're doing can go beyond the ivory tower, that we don't get comfortable and complacent. Because especially as professors, once you get that tenure and promotion, you can sit back and start to coast, right? Now life is good, you're not getting fired by anybody, you know, but I think she shows us the need for righteous discontent, the need to continue to expand your horizon. I had someone say the other day at our graduation, you know, that this could be the palace, but there is a kingdom out there. And I think Wangari was very conscious of that, that the university, things had gotten better for her before, you know, she tried to get into parliament and lost her job. She'd gotten pay equality for men and women, at least for the two of them who fought for it. Mm-hmm. And eventually that started to, you know, get across to other levels of women in the university. But it wasn't enough for her just to get that little victory when there was other struggles that she needed to fight. So for me as a professor, I'm constantly reminded that whether I get tenure and promotion or not, this is just the kingdom. This is just the palace. There is a kingdom up there. And my purpose in life is bigger than the palace, because there is a kingdom out there. So I feel that, I think I find myself constantly discontented. Yes, I'm fighting my own institution right now. a very gentle fight, I hope, about, that people we don't have pay equality in my institution. Men and women are not paid the same. And sometimes some of the excuses they'll use is, well, the man is a breadwinner. And I think that's a ridiculous argument, and it's probably illegal. But, they won't put it down on paper, so you can't take it to court because that becomes heresy. But those kinds of things, to me, I feel the need to keep pushing, to keep fighting back, but also to realize that, there is something I can do back in Kenya, there's something I can do in Africa. And part of the reason I took this job, which was a drastic pay cut for me, was because it allowed me to teach in Africa while located in the US. So I get to go to Africa every year and do the Africa program, which has not enough, but at least it has a few, African students. So finding small ways to go beyond our comfort zone, to do more than, teach, more than get comfortable. And I think the other thing which I believe you've also started to do is recognizing that we have to find a way to make our knowledge, the knowledge we're producing while we're here in the US, in American institutions, accessible to African audiences. And my own feeling about that has been, if I write and I'm writing about African people, then they should be able to read it. So if it's only accessible to American audiences who are in higher education institutions because it's only by subscription, then that can't be the only way for me to go, right? I can't be talking about African women and leadership, and the only people who read it are American women. So I intentionally publish in open access journals or write books, that will be accessible to the people that I'm writing about.
Okay, this is good. Now, since you're also a professor, what would you advise for students to do? And I have also questions, maybe a comment more about the significance of Professor Maathai's fight for pay equality. I mean, I think we tend to think of the West as more progressive in this respect than Africa. At least that's the prevailing ideology, that the West has made a lot of strides in terms of women's rights, and that most of the role models that we should look at in order to make the agenda and engage in the struggle are located in the Northern Hemisphere rather than in Africa. So I think that Professor Maathai's contribution in this regard is extraordinary. And it's even more important because it's something that she did so it seems spontaneously. Something that was never acknowledged as a big deal, but that in spite of not being acknowledged, she kept on going, and her scope kept becoming bigger and bigger. So, she fought for this, how long ago? In Kenya, in the mid-70s. And in the United States, in the 21st century,
we haven't
gotten it yet because, there's the Ledbetter case that a woman in the United States also brought up of lack of gender equality in pay that President Obama supported, and I think she got justice. But today we still have, I think, the statistics say that for every dollar that a man makes, women make 70 cents. Something like that. So, I mean, what do you think about this in terms of how the world is constructed, in terms of who's making progress, who's acknowledged, and, what we can do about it? Women, African women in the United States who really feel who feel that there's a struggle that they need to engage. How does one engage the struggle?
I don't know that I have all the answers because I'm still in the struggle myself. But what I have learned is that, one, we need to talk to each other, because you think you're the only one going through something until you open your mouth and find out there are actually other women in academia or in other organizations who are experiencing similar things. And so, you know, she used to lead National Council of Women of Kenya. That is an organization for women. We need to organize because we need collective action. We need to organize because it's not always possible to get success for some of these kinds of issues by yourself. So having a critical mass of women who are pushing for change, we have a higher likelihood of success. Yes, in her situation, at least with the pay, you know, equality issue, there was just 2 of them who were fighting for it. But they were loud enough, and eventually they broke through. But we don't have to wait for just, you know, I'll do it by myself, because you might get crushed. Yeah. You know, and that's the reality, that if you keep pushing, at least what I've experienced, what I've observed is, if you keep pushing, you could very easily lose your job, like she did eventually, right? But if there was 5 of you doing it, or there's 10 of you doing it within the campus, you have a better chance of being heard, as opposed to just the one person getting pushed out of the way because she's just being noisy. You know, and I think that also helps to get away from, at least in the US context, there's always that idea of the angry black female. Right? And yes, it's not always associated with the Africans as much as the African Americans, but if you're the one solo voice that's making noise, then you will be seen as the angry black female. But if there's 15 of you, then, you know, as a rope of 3 cords is stronger, you cannot break it. So I think there is something in that, you know, there's a lesson in that for us, that just because she did it by herself, in many instances, doesn't mean we have to do the same. The other issue that I've learned observing her life and wondering how she makes sense of some of those things. And I mean, in her books, she talks about, you know, she wasn't always right when it came to the way she went about getting change, right? You know, sometimes she may have pushed too hard, sometimes she may have, you know, maybe there could have been other ways to do it so that you don't lose both the fight and the longer battle. So I think for me, I've learned that sometimes it helps to think of yourself as a tempered radical. And a tempered radical would be a person who wants to bring about change, whether it's within a community or within an organization, but wants to bring that change when you're within the institution. So what she did at the beginning with fighting the university while she was still at the university, you know, because you want to rock that boat to bring about change, but you don't necessarily want to lose your job. And also because in many cases, you cannot bring about community change if you're not a part of that community. Nobody's going to listen to you. I mean, think about all the FGM, you know, stuff that has gone around with the women's movement. People from the West coming to tell Africans FGM is evil. Well, who are you to come and tell us that? We have to decide that for ourselves, right? So when the leadership comes from within the community, you have a better chance of success than when somebody is preaching from outside. So it's to recognize that wherever we are, we can be able to bring change right there, and not to be afraid to rock that boat. You know, and if you think about tempered radicalism as sort of a continuum, there are those who do it a little bit more quietly, you know, rock the boat while, you know, they work like mice. You bite and you blow, you bite and you blow, so that, you know, somebody doesn't know they're being bitten, right? And then there are those on the other end of the continuum who get together and collectivize, and in that process, then you've got a much louder voice. We've got to work through the whole continuum of activism. The silent, the more silent, the softer, you know, you will bring about change. It will just be a little slower and a little less obvious, at least to the people that you're biting. It won't be as obvious because you're also blowing, right? And then on the other end, there's those who are much louder and doing it as groups of women as opposed to individuals. All those are important because there's so many different kinds of change that we need. But we cannot be waiting for white female knight in shining armor to come and save us in Africa. We've got to do it for ourselves. We've got to do it for ourselves.
All right. Thank you very much. I was also wondering, I mean, as a professor, you advise students, of course. So let's say a student comes to you and says, you know, I've heard about Professor Wangari Muta Mathai, and I'd like to do something to honor her or her legacy. I'd like to connect to her legacy. What would you advise her to do?
I think it would depend very much on who the student is and where they are, because I would say start with exactly what is it you can do right now? What do you have right now? If it's to bring other African students on campus together, because not every campus has an African, you know, real community, right? If it's bringing them together so you can have community, then do it. If it's going back to your own country and shaking things up, then do it. But do not think that you cannot be successful because you don't have enough. She didn't have anything when she started. All she had was her brains. You know, her education was, that was her primary resource, was her education. And then her university position. And she used that, right? Because, I mean, she didn't have a degree in environmental science.
Right.
But she saw a problem and she responded to it. So what do you have in your hands? You can use that. You don't have to wait until you've got a grant of $1 million to start creating change. Oh no, just planting a few trees, that's creating change. So sometimes I think it's important for us to not just look at the end result of where Wangari ended, but also look at the beginnings and learn from that too, that there were very humble beginnings, right? It's, okay, so we've got problems here, what can we do? Let's plant some trees. She didn't know how to do it, neither did the women. So who knows, go to the forestry department. Eventually they got tired of training them, started, you know, treating them like they needed diplomas in tree planting. They say, well, all you have to do is put a seed and put some soil and water it, right? It's not rocket science. So recognizing that everybody can do something. You know, we don't start by being Nobel laureates. We start by planting one single tree. We start by, you know, advocating for one woman, for two women. Not, you know, before you get to the global organization, there was a grassroots effort. Because I think sometimes you can think, oh my goodness, but she did so much, I can never get there. Well, she didn't start from the top. She started from the bottom.
All right. So what would you consider to be her most significant contribution?
I think she demonstrates for African girls, especially rural African girls like myself, that education is your way out. Education is your way out because she was not born with a silver spoon in her mouth. She was a village kid who went to school and kept going to school. And for Africans, I think that still remains one of the most important ways to get out of poverty, one of the most important ways to change your circumstances. And I mean, they keep telling us this in the development world, that you educate a woman, you change the course of the village, not just that one woman. Wangari Maathai is an excellent example of that. She got educated, it changed the course of a country. Not just her little village in Nyeri, but the course of an entire country. So I would say, I'll tell girls, look to her as an example. You know, that education opened doors for her. And she recognized that every time, when you read her books, she talks a lot about the fact that education opened doors, right? Because without it, she would never have been a professor, right? Without it, then everything else would not have happened if she hadn't been where she was. She was at the right place, at the right time, with the right skill set. No other resources, just that. Right place, right time, right resources. So I think education continues to be a way for us to respond to political evils, respond to issues of poverty, respond to issues of women's emancipation. You know, so keep saying, make sure our girls continue to go to school, because we still have a disparity even now. In most African countries, we still have a disparity when it comes to boys and girls going to school, especially at the higher levels. You know, you might have near equality at the primary school level, but what are you going to do with a primary school education? Not very much, you know. So when you get to university level, here in the US, we talk about it's right about 50% now, even higher for women.
Yeah, the girls are.
That's not true of African countries. We haven't gotten that parity yet. And yet we recognize we really do need that. We really do.
Okay. You know, thank you so much. But you know, I still want a little more. Wangari Maathai did so many extraordinary things. What attracted the world's attention was her work, her environmental activism, which is why she won the Nobel. She was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. And she made a connection between caring for the environment and world peace.
Yeah.
I think I want to ask you, do you see the connection as seamlessly as she sees it? And then, you know, do you think that the green belt movement in Kenya, especially, is going to increase the scope of the work that Professor Maathai started?
The second part of your question, is the Greenbelt movement going to, you know, scale up?
Yes.
I don't know. I know it's a global movement, right? I know it's a Pan-African movement too. So it's not just in that little office in Kilimani, Nairobi. It's bigger than that. However, I don't know what their capacity is right now. With Wangari gone, I'm hoping that things were left in place so that they can continue to grow. But I think the more important issue there is that more people know about the idea of the need for resources, the need for natural resources, the need for taking care of our forests. And that in Kenya continues to be a big problem. For example, in the last few years, there's been a big fight about cutting down the Mau forest. And the reason why that's a big fight is because the local community doesn't quite understand that you can go and cut it down and plant your corn and plant your beans and you feed yourself today and tomorrow. However, in a few years' time, there won't be any rain because that's a catchment area. And not just you won't have any rain for you guys in this village, but Nairobi won't have any water, because the rivers flow from there. So there's still a big need, I think, for sort of going back to educate those rural communities about why is it we're saying stop cutting down the trees in order to grow, you know, in order to have your little 1 acre farm. Why is it more important to have 1 acre of trees than 1 acre of corn right now in that area? So that kind of work needs to continue, whether by Greenbelt or by other organizations. And what I've realized just by watching sort of the social networks and watching what's going on with some, like my younger cousins are all trained environmentalists, and I'm watching them and the kinds of things that they're engaged in and realizing, okay, so professor may be gone, but there's a lot of little professors coming up who understand the needs of these local communities and who see it not just from a local perspective, but also from a national perspective and from a global perspective. So I'm not too worried about what happens with the one organization, because there's a lot of other organizations at the grassroots that are doing what needs to be done to continue to fight for the preservation of our natural resources. Because without the natural resources, of course, there's not going to be peace. Simple case. Now, when you cut down the trees of the Mau forest, those communities are pushed further up. They are pushed either further into the forest, or they have to go and encroach on other people's land because they need the land to grow their crops. So what happens? Conflict. Because you can't come and take my land. I need my land. But then they're saying we need land too. and you people came and took away whatever, you know, they come up with interesting explanations as to why there needs to be conflict. But at the end of the day, the bottom line is that it's about the land, because land is a very important natural resource. So the more they cut down forests, the more people are being pushed, you know, to fight for the little that remains, the little arable land that remains. So she saw that very clearly. And a lot of younger people are seeing that. So that the conflicts that Kenya had in 2007 and 2008, you can call them political conflicts all you want, but at the end of the day, that was a conflict for natural resources. That was a conflict for land. Because that's what a lot of Kenyans live off of the land, right? And as long as they continue to cut down the forests, then there's less and less arable land because of, you know, desertification. So, did I answer your question?
Yes, I think you did. Some people have also said, connected with the land question, is the question of water. That the struggle for water is actually the most important and pressing issue of our time, and something that would also generate a lot of conflict for access, you know, between countries, between communities, and internationally. So what do you think about this?
I think that same situation with the Mount Forest is an excellent example of that, because like I said, it doesn't just affect the community that's next to the forest. It affects the communities downstream, because the more they cut down those trees, the less water we have in Nairobi. The less water we have in Nairobi, the more chaos you have. So right now in Kenya, whenever I look at the newspapers and I look at Facebook, everybody is complaining about power rationing. Because there's not enough electricity, because the electricity is hydro-powered. Without water, you have no hydropower. So for the last several months, they've had problems because, you know, they keep rationing. People complain about not having electricity for 3 days. Well, what happens then? That means there's people not going to be able to work. The ones who work in factories, because the factories can't run without electricity. That means you have increase in crime. I mean, at the end of the day, without that water, so many other things won't happen. And then it creates all kinds of chaos. So whether in the city or in the villages, no water, no life. No water, no peace. And I think for us, at least in Kenya, I see a disconnect between what like some of the younger people understand and are trying to do and what the government does. It's like the government is deaf, blind, and stupid. So that they do things to placate their constituencies, right, so that they can get votes in December, as opposed to doing things that have a long-term positive effect. So you will say, oh no, we've got to cut down the trees because these people need the land. So what happens down the 5 years down the road when there's no water?
Well, thank you so much.
It's my pleasure.
It's been a pleasure having you.
Pleasure's all mine.
Thanks for being so generous with your time. It's all appreciated.